Hello, my name is Dr. Appel from Ado Psychology Center, where we specialize in treating anxiety, depression, and OCD. Welcome to our video seminar series. Hope you enjoy this video. This video is on foundational concepts for OCD. Please first watch my video on general OCD so you get a general feel for what OCD is like and what treatment is like, and then you'll find it helpful to come here to then understand some foundational concepts that are important for therapists and clients alike to keep in mind when treating OCD. So the goals for this seminar are really just to learn about foundational concepts for OCD and how to implement them. Very briefly, remember that ERP, as I mentioned in my other video on general OCD, ERP stands for exposure and response prevention or ritual prevention, and it involves refraining from engaging in your compulsions and also purposefully exposing yourself to triggering situations. And when you do that, you break the cycle. How do you break the OCD cycle? Because you're used to being triggered, experiencing obsessions which cause distress, engaging in compulsions to undo that distress, finding temporary relief, only for the cycle to keep repeating itself. But when you engage in response prevention and you refrain from engaging in compulsions, you learn that you could tolerate the distress and that eventually goes away on its own. And then you give the whole OCD theme that you're experiencing less meaning, and it tends to dissolve on its own. So here are some foundational concepts that are really important to keep in mind as we're treating OCD. And I am now going to get into each of these more specifically on the next few slides. I want to make a comment though. For those of you who are not so familiar with OCD, this all may seem kind of strange or not so relevant, but for those of you who treat OCD or experience OCD and have gone for treatment, I think you're going to recognize that these 14 foundational concepts can be really, really helpful treating OCD. First is OCD brain gets you further from the truth, even though it makes you think the reverse. So many times people are spending so much time ruminating and engaging with their obsessions and going back and forth. But in reality, it's just getting you further from the truth, not closer. So for example, let's say someone has the thought of what if I become a murderer? Because I just heard this news story of someone similar in age to me, same gender as me, becoming a murderer. But wait a second, am I really going to become a murderer? I'm a nice guy. But then they find out in the article that this person was described by their neighbors as a nice guy. And so you're getting so involved and you're trying to prove to yourself that you are a murderer, you're not a murderer. But OCD brain is getting you further from the truth. Whereas in reality, if instead you use what Jonathan Grayson calls as the gun to the head approach, and you put a gun to your head and say, do you think you're a murderer? You'd be like, no, no way. That's going to get you closer to the truth than what OCD brain is trying to get you to do. Number two, the only option is acceptance of uncertainty, because the alternative will lead to dysfunctional life. So if you think about it, life is full of uncertainties. How do I know for sure this? How do I know for sure that? What if this? Maybe that. The only way you could actually live functionally in life is accepting uncertainty. And if that's the case, then you need to find ways, how do I start accepting uncertainty instead of trying to always find certainty? Because I won't be able to live my life functionally that way. If if I'm uncertain of whether I'm maybe a murderer, or maybe, maybe I hit someone without even realizing with my car, right? So I need to keep redriving my route to make sure that I didn't hit anybody. Or maybe I am an immoral person, or like any type of maybes or what if questions you have, just means that you have a lot of uncertainty, but life is full of uncertainty. And therefore, if you keep chasing certainty, you're going to be led to a dysfunctional life. So your only option really is to accept the uncertainty. Number three, pros and cons. Sit down for a moment and ask yourself, what are the pros for engaging in my OCD compulsions? And what are the cons? And what are the pros for engaging in treatment? And what are the cons? And hopefully this can help you come to a place where you can commit more to the therapy instead of always vacillating between engaging in the therapy fully and engaging in your OCD as well. So just the simple pros and cons can be really important to help you come up with that solid resolution that you need in the beginning of therapy to stay committed to the treatment. Number 4, which path in life will lead you to the most happiness or success? So think about yourself. This is an ACT technique in general when it comes to looking for values, acceptance, and commitment therapy. Check out my video on ACT if you want to learn more about it. But this is a technique used to help people identify their values. So imagine you were, imagine you were at your own funeral, and what are the types of things you'd like to hear people saying about you, and what type of life, you reviewing your life, would you like to say that you lived? Do you want to live? Do you want to say that I lived a life constantly checking in with all of my obsessions, trying to gain certainty, and not being in the present moment, not really being able to connect with people, and instead being very much in my head? Or do you rather say, or do you think you'd rather live the life of accepting that uncertainty, accepting the fact that sometimes maybe you're going to make wrong decisions, and maybe there's a risk that you're a murderer, or whatever else your OCD theme might be. But ultimately, which path will lead you to the most happiness and the most success? Living an OCD life or committing to the therapeutic approach, dealing with uncertainty, and living that kind of life? Number 5, choose and commit to not ruminate even when it is very tempting. See, this is like an intentional decision you have to make and tell yourself, like, I know it's going to be tempting, but in this treatment, I'm going to choose and commit no matter what to not ruminate. And I've mentioned in one of my other OCD videos on treatment challenges and how to overcome them when it comes to different ways to committing to the therapy through motivational phrases, through rewards, through reminders, through accountability. But you definitely does have to be an intentional process where you sit down for a moment and you make a one-time resolution like, I am committing to this treatment. Innocent until proven guilty. This is a little bit of a concept from ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which I plan on putting a video out on in more detail. But it's this idea when you ask yourself, like, maybe I'm a pedophile, or maybe my hands aren't contaminated, or maybe I'm spreading germs. All of these maybes you're treating as guilty until proven innocent. Like, my hands are contaminated unless I know for sure it's not. Because in fact, when people tell you, like, what are you talking about? You're not a murderer. And you say back to them, how do you know for sure? Why is the burden of proof on them? The burden of proof should be on you because we have this rule of innocent until proven guilty. And that's a great rule for OCD. In general, if you ask a question, what if this, or maybe I hit someone and I didn't realize it, maybe, but you're innocent until proven guilty. Don't treat it as guilty until proven innocent, which is usually what we do with an OCD. Healthy aggression is a concept from psychodynamic therapy. And it's this idea that as humans, we have some level of healthy aggression and we have to recognize it as that and not blow it out of proportion or misunderstand it. So, for example, if let's say you had this thought of, my neighbor is so annoying, I just want to punch him in the face. Someone without OCD might be like, yeah, I do. I do want to. Am I going to? No. Am I upset that I had this thought? No, they deserve it. That's a certain level of healthy aggression. Someone with OCD, on the other hand, will say, what kind of person thinks about punching the neighbor in their face? I'm a bad person. Or this means that I'm likely to punch them in the face. So a lack of acceptance of healthy aggression, I think, is one of the drivers of OCD. Instead, recognizing that we're human and it's okay to have thoughts or feelings or, impure thoughts, whatever it might be, that are intrusive, and allowing it to be there and not turning it into a big deal can be really is a really important thing to keep in mind when treating OCD. Functional certainty is another term from ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, and this is the idea of recognizing that even if you are not statistically or absolutely certain about something, you can still be functionally certain about it. So I'll give you an example. Are you certain that your ceiling right now is not going to collapse on you? You're going to look up and you'll be like, yeah, I'm certain. And then I'll tell you, prove it. And you'd be like, I don't think it's going to collapse. It never did. I don't see any cracks. Do you know for sure? So you can't be 100% certain, and yet you're still saying that you're certain. Why? Because as human beings, when we say we're certain or we're 100% sure, what we really mean to say is 99.999%. So when it comes to OCD as well, you want to recognize that just because statistically it's possible that you're a murderer or a serial killer, but functionally it's not. Like if you know yourself and your family knows you, you know like you're just not a murderer. It's just not you. And so you want to try to find a place where you can become functionally certain and not worry about absolute or statistical certainty, which you'll never get anyways. I'll note briefly that this is a little bit different than from what we would do from an ERP approach instead of ICBT. In ERP, it's more about tolerating uncertainty, which is saying like, okay, it's a possible you're a murderer, yeah, but it's a very small chance, and life is full of uncertainties. You just need to accept the uncertainty of it and keep living your life and not let it bog you down. But in ICBT, we say that it's not so much about tolerating the uncertainty of it, it's just recognizing the functional certainty of it. Number 9, everything is possible. So possibility of feared outcome does not justify compulsion. It's very similar to the previous slide, but it pretty much says that if you're engaging in a compulsion because of a possibility, like I might have germs, I might be a murderer, so I have to do this, or, in all of these cases, it's just possibility, and life is full of possibilities. So just because something's possible, that's not a reason to actually engage in compulsions. It's very similar, again, to the idea of innocent until proven guilty as well. Number 10, OCD gets you to travel away from reality and into fantasy land. And this is a very, very true one, where someone, in their mind, if let's say they have harm OCD and they're afraid they left the fire on the stove, it's going to burn the house down. So they start picturing, a fire in their mind. But if you take anyone and you sit them down and you say, close your eyes and recognize that, you do have children in the house and you're not fully always aware of what they're doing. So it's possible they turn the stove on. And picture, a paper towel near the stove that gets caught on fire. And the fire now is spreading to the walls, and you hear screaming and yelling, and it's going up to the upstairs apartment, and it's spreading more, and you start seeing smoke, and like all your belongings are there. And if this happens, it'll be really, really catastrophic. You're gonna have to get new, identity cards or whatever it may be, driver's license, credit card, passport. By the time you're done with this, the person is probably going to get up and say, "One moment, please. I want to quickly check my house to make sure it didn't burn down." Because if you get into the fantasy land and you get into like a really rich story and imagination, things start feeling very real. So when you engage in your OCD obsessions, that's kind of what you're doing. You're engaging in it so much to the point where you're giving it meaning, you're visualizing it, and now it's taking you away from reality to fantasy land, which means that what you need to do to reverse this is to get back into reality and preferably never even start going down that OCD lane into fantasy land and instead ground yourself in the current reality that you are right now. Number 11, whenever you go down imagination lane, it would always feel very real. That's very similar to the slide I just mentioned before, which is the idea that the more you give in to the OCD story, the more you then start feeling like it's a real possibility. And so the trick is to not go down imagination lane. And this also is borrowed from ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which again, I plan on doing a more in-depth video at some point in the future on. Number 12, OCD is like a matrix. So you need to keep resolutions made from outside the matrix. When you are triggered in an OCD moment, it's very hard to recognize it completely as a trigger and engage in the therapeutic response. So a better approach is to come up with a resolution from outside the matrix before you're triggered and telling yourself, I know that when it comes to like harm themes related to OCD, which is my subtype, as an example, I know that I'm going to feel like it's real reality. And so I need to come up with a response now that I'm going to use when I'm in the matrix, because if I try figuring it out once I'm triggered, I'm not going to be able to. And the response might be something as simple as like, that's just a thought. Thank you, mind, for that thought. I'm going to continue living my life. The response might be, thank you, OCD movie. I'm not going to fall for you. The response might be, like with irreverence or humor. So yeah, I probably did hit someone. In fact, I probably hit like an entire neighborhood, and everyone's like lying on the floor because as I was driving, I must have hit everyone. But whatever response you want to have, you want to kind of recognize, and in the moment it's going to be hard to do it. So you have to find a way to access this response when you're triggered in the matrix. You got to access this response that you came up with from before you were triggered, from outside the matrix. Number 13. OCD doubt is usually triggered by a what if or maybe statement, not by concrete information from the here and now. And this is another one that's really important to remember, and it will help you differentiate between OCD versus other types of doubts. And I mentioned this in my other video on treatment challenges for OCD, where this is, again, a foundational concept to recognize that if what you're doubting is because of a what if statement or maybe statement, you could pretty clearly attribute it to OCD and not answer it. Your mind sends you thousands of thoughts a day, thousands of what ifs, thousands of maybes, some are true, some are not. You don't have to answer each of those thoughts. And that's the skill over here by remembering that just because I have an OCD thought, if it's triggered by maybe this or what if that, you can say, okay, what if? And you can leave it there. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to try to resolve it. And that's actually the healthier response. And last but not least, number 14, OCD cannot survive without your participation. OCD alone cannot survive unless you are actively engaging with it. And so the real trick is to convey irrelevance to all of your OCD thoughts. Don't engage with it, don't respond to it, don't answer it, and then it will die on its own. Thoughts only have as much meaning and power and value as we give to them. And so if you don't give them any power and you just treat it as OCD, it will die on its own. So in summary, there are many foundational concepts that, once acknowledged, can make it easier to stick to ERP therapy. And we just went through 14 of them. An OCD specialist can help you identify those concepts that will be most helpful for you. So instead of turning this into a compulsion and finding the best response, work with a therapist or even work with yourself if you feel up to it, and try to identify what's one or two responses or what are one or two concepts here that I really need to keep in mind and that is uniquely relevant to my specific experience of OCD. Hope you enjoyed this video seminar. To see a full list of our current videos as well as upcoming videos that we'll be posting soon, visit us at adopsychologycenter.com and sign up to be notified when we post new videos. Bye for now.